everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know this is everybody's favorite topic, QC. It's riveting stuff, and we're going to keep this extra short and sweet for y'all and just kind of run through some optimization best practices for you today. Marty is our head of QC over here. He also runs the sales on the Commonwealth Group side. If you guys are interested in things like contract underwriting, processing, and QC, he's your guy. I work over here on the condo project review team. It's a company called Condo Analytics, and we do condo project reviews for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. We get all the documents for you, certify it meets Fannie Mae, and then deliver it back to you in a nice, clean package. So I just wanted to come in and shamelessly plug my own services. If you guys need help with condos, please do give me a call. But outside of that, you have a great presenter here today. Marty Luplo has been with the Commonwealth Group for 5 years. We actually started our careers together at a bank here in Nashville about 10 years ago, and then we got sucked into this mortgage industry about 5 years ago at the same time. So
happens
you're
to
in
the
for a
best of
treat.
us.
You're in for a treat. Marty's going to show you some good stuff, and hopefully there's some good key takeaways that you can bring to your organizations here. But without further ado, Marty, I'll turn it back over to you. Thanks for letting me shamelessly plug myself.
Nicky,
and
great
Condo
introduction.
Analytics.
Thank you for that. Yeah, Nick and Condo Analytics, they're best in the business if you guys ever need help with condo reviews. So with that, we'll get started here. For the next slide. So I'm going to keep this very simple, and because QC doesn't have to be that complicated. Some people make it complicated, but I feel like the simpler you present everything and talk about this sort of stuff, the better. But there are three main types of required QC, and everybody probably already knows this, but I'm just going to briefly touch on all of them. There's pre-funding QC. Everybody's required to do 10%. Most folks do a full file review, and that's fine, but you do have to be looking at 10% of your production. Pre-funding QC is performed prior to closing, so before the loan closes, and it really is strictly a review of the credit decision. Doesn't really go into compliance that much. Doesn't really go into re-verifications where you're checking for borrower misrep or anything like that. It's simply making sure the underwriter made the correct credit decision on the file. After pre-funding is post-closing QC. I'm sure everybody is familiar with that as well. Obviously, it happens after the loan closes. It is a more in-depth review in the fact that it not only reviews the credit decision, but you go into a compliance review as well. And then there's this whole re-verification process where you're, double checking borrower pay stubs and asset statements, the credit report, the CD, just to make sure that there wasn't any funny business at any point along the way. Nothing was fabricated by the borrower. So, it's a very important part of the QC process to ensure that everything was clean there. And then finally, the last piece of QC that Fannie Mae wants you to perform is a post-closing targeted review. Okay. I just put a couple of examples. Not everybody does it, and that's okay. We're not going to say anything, but if Fannie Mae really wants you to be doing it, I put a couple of examples of the most common ones that we see people perform. You could take a look at adverse files. You could take a look at self-employed files, rental income, gifted funds, investment properties. When choosing a type of post-closing targeted review, we say it's either going to be something that's inherently complicated, like a giant rental income calculation, or it's something that you've identified in your QC reporting that seems to be some sort of issue, whether it's a trading gap or what have you, with your underwriters. So that's really how you pick that. So once again, keeping it simple, three main types of QC. Which one deserves most of your attention? Where would it be a good idea to focus your dollars and your time in order to have the most efficient QC program as possible? Nick, would you like to take a shot at this?
I don't know, Marty. I don't have a clue. I was thinking maybe just not doing QC and just rolling the dice.
Well, unfortunately, we've seen that before. I wouldn't recommend it. But what I would recommend you do is focus your time and energy on pre-funding QC. You ask why? Because in pre-funding QC, you're able to detect and mitigate the defects prior to closing. So you're able to find problems and fix whatever the problem is before the loan closes, before it's too late. Because after the loan closes, sometimes you get lucky. Sometimes you can get away with fixing some things, but a lot of the times, you're stuck, especially if it's a bad income calculation. If you're missing documentation, you got to go back to the borrower. Like it's probably 2 months since their loan closed. They're probably not going to be very nice about it. They're probably not going to want to go out of their way to get a bank statement from last June for you. Like I've already have my house and I've made the first couple mortgage payments. I'm done here, sort of thing. So that's one reason, you're actually able to fix problems with files before it's too late. Another reason is that it's more cost effective. Typically, it doesn't cost as much to perform pre-funding QC. I know that's the case here at the Commonwealth Group, but I know it's probably a similar case at a lot of other places, or even internally. There's just not as much involved. Like I said earlier, it's a strict credit review. You're not doing the re-verifications. You're not going into compliance. It doesn't cost as much. And then three, the turn times are faster. We perform pre-funding QC same day, 24 hours at the maximum. But post-closing QC, as it takes a long time. Our turn times are about 45 days, about 60 is about average. I know you remember back in the refi boom, there was a big problem with post-closing QC. There were backlogs 4 or 5 months. So by the time you find post-closing QC errors, it's something that happened 2, 3 months prior, and it's way too late to try to fix it. So for those reasons, pre-funding QC is a much better tool at identifying problems and fixing them. It's the most useful type of QC by far. What types of pre-funding QC can you implement? There's the plain Jane random file selection. That's a full file pre-funding QC review. You're looking at everything from A to Z. You'd implement those already with your 10% full file review, but maybe if you get a new hire, you may want to take a closer look and maybe add a couple more random selections on the new hire. Or if your shop just got approved to do FHA loans, you guys really haven't ever done them before, it might be a good idea to implement a higher percentage of random full file reviews on the pre-funding side for that type of loan. You could also go into targeted full file reviews. So instead of having a random selection, you could be looking for certain full file characteristics that would trigger a review. So maybe a high DTI file, a file with a high LTV, and you're kind of unsure about the appraisal and some other aspects of it. Like I mentioned, new hires and specific file types as well. But that's when you're looking at the full file from A to Z on the pre-funding side, just a full credit review. And on top of the full credit review, you can do component reviews as well. And that's where you're just looking at specific components of the file, just the income calculation, just the assets, just the credit, just the appraisal. And that's kind of what I want to harp on a little bit today, these component reviews, because when you kind of get into what's the most cost effective type of QC, it's going to be a pre-funded targeted component review, because number one, it's pre-funding QC. It's going to be cheaper than, or less expensive than post-closing. But number two, you're just looking at one part of the file. So you're just looking at the income calculation. You're just looking at the assets. It's going to be 25% as expensive as a full file review. So you're going to be getting a lot more bang for your buck in dollars allocated to QC in these component reviews. And you're actually targeting areas in the file where you have problems. So you pick these based on QC reporting results. And like I said earlier, I'm keep saying it, inherently complicated parts of the file. Self-employed calculations, rental income calculations, gifted assets, that sort of thing. So we're going to harp on that. Moving on, we're not the only ones saying this. I think it's sound advice, but this is coming directly from the source. I know I've pointed to this document if you've been on these QC webinars in the past. This is called Fannie Mae's Beyond the Guide. They on purpose make the pre-funding QC guide kind of vague because they know every shop is different and everybody's going to have different requirements in their QC process. So because of that, they came out with Beyond the Guide, where they really kind of go into the weeds a little bit more on what you should be doing on the pre-funding side of the fence. So just kind of a generic example here. If it goes from fundamental to proficient to highly proficient QC processes. Fundamental is going to be that lending shop that just does their 10% pre-funding QC to check a box so they don't get in trouble. They really don't have any hard stops on stopping the file while the QC file review is going on. They don't really have any checks and balances in place. Excuse me. Got a little cold today. It was something my 4-year-old brought home from preschool, but I think I'll survive. So fundamental is just checking the QC box. Proficient is where you're kind of going in and targeting a couple more aspects of the file on the pre-funding side. And then a highly proficient QC review process would be one that as an ongoing basis, probably quarterly is what I would recommend. You take a look at your post-closing QC reporting, you see what kind of mistakes are being made, and you really kind of make a decision on what you need to be taking a look at on the pre-funding side of the fence. What areas are we missing? Is there a specific underwriter that's missing the same sort of thing over and over again? Is there something new that we're just starting to do that we haven't done before that we maybe need to take a closer look at? That sort of thing. So if you get into a rhythm, get into a cycle every three or 4 months or so, taking a look at your QC results and tweaking what you're looking at as a targeted review is concerned is really what you want to be doing, and having those checks and balances in place to where your operation knows that, hey, this file just got submitted to QC. This doesn't need to go to closing until we take a look at it and everybody gets the okay from the file auditor. So that's just kind of in a nutshell what everybody needs to be doing out there is what we believe. Excuse me again. Okay. So I know that was a lot of information. I've put together 3 examples here to kind of lay out and see if we can do a little collaborative effort. I know I only have Nick here, but I'll play along with him. See, I'm going to read a scenario, and based on the pre-funding reviews we just talked about, we'll see if we can determine what the best course of action would be to take. So example 1, this is the training gap example. So underwriter Adam improperly documented gifted assets twice in the past 3 months, according to the most recent most recent post-closing QC reports. No other defects. What should we do?
Well, Marty, I think we should write him a strongly worded letter to tell him that this stuff is very important. I don't know. I would target his loans in particular, or maybe just target that specific thing in his loans and review every single loan he signed off on for that.
Yeah, put Adam on notice for sure. No, so if he's just missing gifted asset documentation, and we're going to assume that everything else is clean in his file, so he's a pro at income calculations, he's a pro at evaluating credit and appraisals. It doesn't, if you're spotting gifted funds documentation, it doesn't make sense to break open every single file that Adam is underwriting and looking at the income. It doesn't make sense to look at the credit. It doesn't make sense to look at the appraisal in a targeted sense, because that's not what he's missing. He's missing gifted funds. So in this case, it would be a good idea to do a targeted component review on gifted funds. So if Adam's underwriting a file, if you can indicate that they have gifted funds, and I know you can in several LOSs, but Compass comes to mind. I know you can create a flag to flag those and send those to QC and take a look at those. So what I would do is it seems like it'd be a training gap, provide gifted fund documentation training to Adam, implement a pre-funding component review on gifted funds to double check that he's learned from the training and is doing a good job now, and go from there. But like I said earlier with pre-funding QC, if there is an issue still, the good news is that you can catch it and you can do something about it before the loan closes and it's too late.
Marty, do those, if let's say we audit Adam and do those targeted reviews count towards our 10% required by Fannie?
What a wonderful question. They absolutely do. They absolutely do. So Instead of just checking the box and doing a random 10% pre-funding full file review on just random 10%, I think it'd be a better use of dollars to really sit down and take a look at your QC results from, post-closing QC results or full file pre-funding QC results even, and identify some areas in which you need to take a look at. And these targeted component reviews, every one that you do, does count towards that 10% of your production total that you need to be reviewing. And also just the targeted full file reviews in general, if there's a specific loan type that you need to work on. But yes, they all count towards your 10%. So if you've got to do it, you might as well be focusing on something that you need to work on. Good question.
Thanks.
Example 2, we have a new employee. So lender ABC is growing rapidly and just hired a new underwriter. The underwriter's resume and recommendations are great, but you've never worked together. This is kind of a silly example, but what should you do here? We see this most often for those full file targeted reviews. So whenever you have a new hire, even new processor, new loan officer, new underwriter, and you're not familiar with their work because you've never worked with them before, it's always a good idea to implement some sort of QC process. Just, you don't have to look at everything, but I would recommend looking at a higher percentage than a random 10% of their production, just to make sure that they're doing things the way that your shop wants them to do. So, they could be the best underwriters or processors or LOs in the world, but until you develop that working relationship with them and have some tenure with them, you really don't know. So, we highly recommend that whenever you have a new employee start, that you implement some sort of QC process to double check what it is that they're doing, just to be on the safe side. Because I'll say it for like the 4th or 5th time, if there is a problem, you can fix it before it's too late on the pre-funding side. I'm going to take a drink of water before this example. So example 3 is the Hawaii flight example. So Nick, I'm not talking about vacation, even though I'm thinking about it a little bit. And what does this have to do with QC? So I was reading an article the other week about a flight from LA to Hawaii. And so airplanes from LA to Hawaii, they fly over the Pacific Ocean for about 6 hours. And in this instance, the captain came over the radio to the cabin and said, you guys aren't going to like this, but we're not taking off right now. I've got a, my fuel pressure gauge on my right engine's reading a little bit high, and I'm looking at the maintenance report here. And as soon as we land back from Hawaii, this flight lands back from Hawaii, we're due for a new fuel pump. And because of these 2 items, I don't feel comfortable taking off and flying to Hawaii because, I don't feel comfortable going over the ocean for 6 hours when my right engine could go out. So I'm going to relate that to quality control in the mortgage business. So say you've got a file that you're looking at, DTI's 49, LTV is really high, the SSR score on the appraisal is really high, and you just don't have a good feeling about it. What do? Send it to QC. Why not? If you're unsure about the income calculation is really hard, send that only, or send the whole file. It's better to be safe than sorry. It's better to have another pair of eyes on it other than the underwriter to look at it from an auditor's perspective to see if there's anything wrong with it, especially with those files. And I know they're not few and far between right now. I see a lot of files like this, especially in QC, that maybe aren't the best, but maybe they have a couple higher risk items here or there. Take another look. Why not? I mean, that's why you have a QC program in the first place, to double check for these kind of errors and potential mistakes. And that's my Hawaii flight example. Don't take off and fly over the Pacific Ocean for 6 hours when you're unsure about something. Don't close the loan and send it off when you maybe could put another pair of eyes on it and double check that everything's okay. So, as promised, I was going to keep this short and sweet. Here are a couple key takeaways from today. And once again, we'll be sending the slideshow out to everybody after this. So, key takeaways for a efficient QC program, how to optimize your QC program. Focus on pre-funding QC. I know you have to do all those types of QC, but if you're really going to focus on one area, focus on pre-funding. It's more cost effective. It doesn't cost as much money. It takes a lot less time than post-closing QC. It doesn't take 2 months. And you can fix the defects before it's too late. You can't do that with post-closing QC. You're toast if you find something wrong with a file and it's after the loan's closed. What are you going to do? Leverage your pre and post closing QC, full file QC reports. So that use those as your roadmap for what you do or for how you select your targeted reviews. See where the errors are coming from. Is it a specific type across all underwriters? Is it a specific error? Is one underwriter having more errors than others? Use that as a roadmap. Review those QC reports quarterly and tweak your targeted reviews. Hawaii flight, never be afraid to send a file to QC if you have a bad feeling about something. And lastly, find defects. That's what you're supposed to be doing in pre-funding QC. You're supposed to be finding defects and fixing them before the loan closes. So a good QC, pre-funding QC program will be finding defects. And, you think defects QC, that's a bad thing. And typically it is. On the post-closing side, you don't want to find defects over there because, like I said, like 10 times now, you can't fix them. You can fix them on the pre-funding side. Fannie Mae and the investors, to an extent, like to see defects on your pre-funding QC reports because that means you're doing a good job. That means you're focusing on problematic errors and finding defects and fixing them. If you're not finding a lot of defects in your pre-funding QC, then you're probably not looking in the right places. So you need somebody to help find defects in your pipeline. Give us a call. I'm sure Grandy and the QC guys over there can find some defects for you. So with that, here's the closing slide. Thank you everybody for coming. I've got my
I have a
email address
question,
here.
Marty.
Yes, Nikki.
Okay, so let's say, can you just talk a little bit more about this component review piece and how you can use it to count towards your 10%? Like, is it safe to say that you can do component reviews for both pre-funding and post-funding QC on specific things that your organization's had trouble with in the past, and that counts as a whole loan towards your 10%?
Yeah.
Is that for both pre and
only on the
and
pre-funding side?
Only on pre. Okay.
Yeah. So post-closing, they're going to want a full file post-closing QC review. As mentioned, you can target what type of files you pick for post-closing, but it's going to be an entire review. It's going to look income through appraisal, everything plus compliance and the re-verifications. The targeted component reviews come into play with pre-funding QC. So say you're a shop that closes 50 loans a month. So 10% of that would be 5 files, right? So you need to pick 5 files for pre-funding QC. You can look at 5 random files in their entirety and hope you find some stuff in the pre-funding QC side. Or you can take a look at your reports for months past and identify some problematic areas and say, you know what, we're going to target these areas. I see underwriter ABC missed, the student loan payment. It was 0 on the credit report and it should have been 1% or whatever. So we're going to look at the VOL on 5 files that come through the pipeline. Or you've had some rental income calculation errors. So instead of looking at 5 random files, you're going to look at 5 files that have rental income qualifying the borrower, and you're just going to evaluate the income section. So doing that.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, so this seems like a way that I could cut down on my costs if I was only looking at one section. I'm assuming we charge less for this.
Yes, much less.
So you can do your pre-funding QC and also cut down on your cost. I know a lot of people are wondering, how do I reduce my costs right now because there's not a lot coming through the door. That seems like a pretty good area for so far as reducing costs go, is doing these component reviews on the pre-funding side for just high-risk loans. Correct. Is that safe to say?
It is, and I'll caveat that they don't want your pre-funding QC full file reviews to go to 0, right? So I'd recommend at the very minimum doing 1 of those per month. But everything else you look at could be a targeted component review where you're just looking at a specific aspect, and it would drastically cut down on the cost of your QC. And it'd be more effective. You'd actually find you'd find more defects, I would imagine.
Right. So you're saying use your previous months and quarters reports to kind of inform how you do QC going forward, that it's not supposed to be like a static thing. You just do the same thing every single month. You should learn from your mistakes, is what you're saying.
Yes, you should learn from your mistakes and adapt what you're looking at in your QC process. And we help folks with that all the time. If you have questions, you want us to take a look at your QC reports, whether it's from us or somebody else, give us a call, give us an email. We don't judge. But we're happy to help you out just on pre-funding QC. If you like another vendor for post-closing, but you would like to explore something else for pre-funding, we're happy to do that. If your vendor doesn't offer component reviews, but you want to stick with them for the full file pre-funding QC reviews, that's fine. Just send us income calculations. Send us appraisals, and we'll put it through Fannie Mae's collateral underwriter and do an appraisal assessment.
That's all the questions that I had. Does anyone in the audience want to type something out? I'm not seeing any questions in here.
Well, I don't see any questions coming in, but what we'll do is we'll send this slide deck out to everybody, and then when the recording becomes available, we'll send that as well. So whenever you get an email from me, feel free to shoot any questions back, and I'll answer them. I'll have my little phone number on there. Call me if you'd rather do that. But I hope this was useful. I hope we didn't take too much time. I felt like we were pretty quick. We're coming up on the 30-minute mark. But we enjoyed everybody's company. Thanks for coming in and listening to our QC TED Talk. And we look forward to working with you hopefully in the future. Thanks again.
Thanks, Marty.